Hello and welcome to the Extreme Cinema Podcast with me, Alexander Sternberg, and Dom Loach. How are you doing, Dom?
I am very good, thank you. How are you, Stenny?
I'm good. Today's film is Cannibal Holocaust, one of the most infamous cannibal films and video nasties of the 80s. The film was a pioneer in found footage horror, as well as one of the most controversial films in the horror subgenre. So, Dom, what did you think of Cannibal Holocaust?
It's pretty good. It's not like the Antichrist thing like we did in the first one, but it's close. It's for 1980. It's a very good film, and like the things it brings to the table are great.
Yes, yeah, I agree that the things it brings to the table are real good. I mean, especially the kind of realism at the end and all that. It's a phenomenal film, and also one of the most controversial things I think we could have chosen to talk about is episode 2, because there's a lot of immorality on display on screen,
Oh,
which we'll get into. It's a tough watch. It's a real tough watch still today, but it's so interesting and has a lot to say. Like, it is a real film that is also just, I mean, as exploitative as you can get.
oh, definitely. Do you know what I watching it again completely forgot about was how much of it isn't found footage. How much of it is just them finding the thing at the beginning?
Yeah, and which is by far the weaker part of the film. I frankly think that part, the direction in the found footage bit, is really quite good. I mean, I don't think Deodato was ever known as some genius director, but it's really great in the found footage segments. But the first half it's quite rough. It's a very rough film. I mean, a thing that kind of struck me when we start watching the film is, if we're going for now weird comparisons, are you ready for the weirdest comparison possibly ever?
Yeah, go for it.
I want to see what you think of this. You really get in the first half of this film a kind of 1930s adventure movie feel to it. Honestly, I was watching it and going, this is kind of like the first bit of King Kong. It's kind of like them getting to Skull Island.
You know what? I do quite see where you're coming from, actually.
Like, it's got a real sort of into the jungle we go, we could die and stuff, but it's just that. But also, each scene is a collage of either brutal violence, usually towards women, or murdering an innocent animal.
Yeah, definitely. It is very like that, actually. I've never thought about it, but it could just be like a fucked up Indiana Jones almost. Like beginning part.
Oh, absolutely. And the thing that makes this film really worth talking about is that beginning part is sort of turned on its head afterward, but it not quite. I mean, shall we start with the directing and how that works, and especially just the found footage, because you know, full spoilers as ever. Every episode of this is full spoilers. So they're looking for these. You think if it's a typical cannibal film, you think that, okay, they've been brutally murdered by the horrible indigenous people, and we got to go find the footage. And then they find the footage, and then the film kind of turns it on its head, and it's like, actually, these people abused them and were horrible colonialist attitudes, and they got what was coming to them. That's really interesting, and it's done in a really
Yeah.
interesting way when they've discovered the footage. And I love how flawed the footage they find is, just how grimy and dirty it is. It's really, like, I am pretty sure it's on record that the people who made Blair Witch actually didn't see this, but were like, "Oh no, this is what we've done." Like, full credit to it.
Is
But
is
it's quite amazing that the people who made Blair Witch didn't see this, because it really has that feel which you get from the on location shooting, of just, we've got a bunch of, I'm guessing, 16mm cameras, and we are just filming the rainforest.
yeah, is that true? I didn't know that about Blair Witch. That they'd never seen this.
Oh yeah, they it got brought up to them, all over the time, and I think they said something like, "We actually hadn't seen this, but credit where credit's due. This was the first." Even though I'm gonna put on my little pretentious movie critic hat and go, the films of Peter Watkins, in particular Privilege and Punishment Park, kind of were the first found footage, but this is the first found footage horror movie. Like, this is all the staples of the found footage horror movie, especially which is the characters dead at the end.
I think before this was like faux documentary style that never went into horror.
Well, I was watching an interview with Deodato, and he really didn't struck me how he just struck me as a fundamentally normal dude, which for the guy who made this and Jungle Holocaust, Washing Machine, House at the End of the Park, you're just amazed. But he says his three main influencers, and he was a assistant director on two of these influencers' films, is Roberto Rossellini, who did Rome Open City, Italian neorealist director.
Yeah.
Sergio Corbucci, who did the original Django movie and some other spaghetti westerns, which is a film I've kind of now decided I need to go back to. And then the fairly obvious one is the Mondo movie films.
I was going to mention the Mondo films as well, obviously, because that's like big.
That it uses the language of documentary like that does to be completely sort of sensationalist. But also it's flipping the cannibal genre on its head as well at the same time, while also being the kind of Nate plus ultra of cannibal movies. I mean, this is the most famous Italian cannibal movie by a mile. Sort of most people have seen this, and most people don't bother getting round to The Man from Deep River or, Emmanuel and the Last Cannibals unless they're properly diving into this.
Oh, massively, yeah. It's something else you said that was interesting was how you like it comes back and kind of flips it and kind of almost shows them as exploitative and stuff like that. And
that's
I do agree with you on that. But also, the film is in itself very exploitative at the same time.
This is the main thing I have down on my notes, and I've written the word dichotomy, and I spelled it correctly. It's this dichotomy because it's an exploitation film that's anti-exploitation film, and it's I think more problematically or more interestingly, it's a film that is against racism and against sort of this colonialist attitude and imperialism, while also being quite racist.
Yeah,
the film is sort of trying to say, go for it.
Yeah, because I feel like it, like obviously what they see on the documentary, the faux documentary, obviously, is like real rough, like horrible stuff that they do, and obviously the filmmakers aren't doing that, but they're still being very exploitative to an indigenous people, and
it's not
just the animal stuff as well.
It's not just being exploitative to indigenous people by sort of paying them pittance and whatnot. It's the depiction of them in the first half. I mean, I think the specific bit I have in mind is when he's, showing peace and he's walking naked in the river, and then all the female, indigenous people come round and just want him so bad. Like, if the point of your film is actually these people are, who in the exploitation movies and the Mondo movies, etc., are portrayed as, savage cannibals are actually pretty civilized, and we're coming in and fucking shit up, and their response is just. That's a really interesting point to make, but it's so fucking hypocritical because it's also portraying them as these sort of savages, which the film is then decrying what itself is doing.
Yeah, very much so. But then I also feel like at the same time, this is 1980, so you kind of got to give it a little bit of credit for at least saying that in 1980.
It's a very clever film. It has a lot to say. If the direction in the non-found footage was better, and if it didn't have to hit these beats of an Italian cannibal, cannibal film, it could have been a really truly great film.
Yeah,
definitely. It's a
definitely.
real 70s attitude to making films that sort of damn morality, or making art in general, damn morality, we will do what we want. I mean, I guess let's get into the animal slaughter now. I was watching interviews with some of the actors in this film, and they used two of them used the word betrayed, that they felt betrayed, that when they said animals, that they didn't think for 1 second that meant real animals. And The lead woman in this film said there was almost a revolt on set over this. It's fucking horrible. And the Blu-ray cuts for British Blu-ray are so weird because the marsupial is out, totally out. The cut around that is pretty well done, but the turtle is totally in, and that is the most horrific thing in the film. Real thing. I mean, when they're raping the indigenous women, that is also one of the most horrendous things, but that kind of means something. That's why that's so horrendous. This is just horrendous because they've just taken this poor defenseless turtle, and I know they chopped its head off, but it looks like it's still alive, and it's like that. It's just it's quite unforgivable, to be honest.
Oh yeah, completely. It's watching it again. I forgot how fucking long that scene is as well. Like, oh my god, it kept going.
It goes on forever, and it's just not pleasant, and you can see the justification for it in like an artistic, you know, medium that like, oh, we put real animals in this, and then we got documentary style fake murder footage, and then you're gonna think that the murder footage is real, and indeed some people did, which we'll talk about, but it's not worth it. It's not some high art versus low art thing. I do not care if you're Michelle Haneke or Francis Ford Coppola or Ruggero Deodato or Marianne Dora. You don't fucking kill an animal. If you go into an abattoir and film that or something, it's one thing, but you just don't kill an animal. You don't kill an animal painfully, especially for your film. There's just no justice. There's no reason to do this.
No, absolutely not. And like, this is not like, if it did mean anything to the film, it'd still not be an excuse. But like, the turtle scene literally does nothing. Like the turtle scene does nothing. It's just them like butchering a turtle.
It's there to be an exploitation film, which is pretty ironic, as we were saying, when the film is decrying this kind of exploitation, while wait, we have to kill animals because it's a cannibal film, we need to up the gore factor, so here's this poor turtle we found, sorry. Like, no excuse for the marsupial bit, but at least that looks like it was killed somewhat properly. This is awful. Like, the fact that the turtle is in the BBFC cuts now, but the marsupial is out, is arbitrary at the highest level. They just don't want to cut 5 minutes out the film, so they cut something that's 20 seconds out the film instead, so they don't go, Cannibal Holocaust still has 5 minutes of cuts in this country. And like, you know what? I'm okay it being cut. I think animal slaughter is where you draw the line. Maybe when the film gets to 50 years old, which is relatively soon, we can talk about allowing it uncut, but you just really shouldn't.
Absolutely.
And this is happening. I know I'm going on a bit, but like, this is still happening. People are still trying to excuse this. And I'd forgotten the details. Like Arrow are releasing, I don't even fucking remember what film it is, and I'm gonna have to Google it now. So apologies if you hear my keyboard typing. But like, they put out a statement being, what's this film called? Years of Lead. It's a Italian crime film because Italians, and there's 17 seconds of like animal cruelty towards a mouse being cut out, and I saw people in the Facebook comments going, "Well, I'm not buying this now. I'm against censorship." If your decision to buy a film is based on 17 seconds of a mouse being tortured, fuck you. You don't care. What's the point?
No, that's very weird. If their entire basis of buying a film is, well, I didn't see the mouse die, so I can't watch this. What?
I get the desire to want something uncut. Like when I was looking for like My Last House on the Left DVD, I'm sure, because The Last House on the Left have fake scenes between consenting adults. So that should be available uncut, but it's an animal. It's a different matter, and you don't need that in your film.
Yeah, exactly. And I think this leads perfectly into as well, talking about the director getting arrested after it was shown at its first viewing in Italy,
yes,
which is one of my favorite stories ever.
Well, I was reading up on this. So he actually wasn't initially arrested for murder. He was arrested for obscenity. And then some French publication fucking suggested in their review of it that maybe it was real, and the Italian police were like, well, that's all the evidence we need. Sorry, Ruggero, we're charging you with murder.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Had to go get his assistant to track the actors down.
Yeah, that's like the actors walked into the courtroom and the people were like, "Oh, maybe they're not
Oh,
dead then." Like, it's such
we're
a
complete. And you know what's funny as well? Some of the gore effects in this film aren't great, but I guess it
no.
was so revolutionary with the found footage that it was so believable. Even though there's like one bit in it, it's not one of the lead actors; it's one of the indigenous people. They're like cutting someone open, and it looks like they're just rubbing a stone that has some sort of red liquid on them. It actually looks fairly bad.
Oh, yeah, towards the ending, right towards the end.
Yeah, yeah.
The effects are not great at all. Like the bit with the pike looks amazing. The bit where
That's iconic. That's horror iconic. That, and you know how that was done?
she sat on like a little thing, didn't she?
Bicycle seat. And it
Yeah,
hit it
yeah,
very well. It.
yeah. That's genius. But like, if they thought those people were getting cut up at the end, they need to watch again because it's just people rubbing like
But I guess
things across like.
I guess it's the found footage. It's just it was so revolutionary at the time. They were like, "Well, this looks like a documentary," and their brains must have been telling them, "Well, this clearly must be real."
Yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, I guess because it's such a new concept, weren't it? Like
I mean,
nobody had seen anything like that.
to lend Cannibal Holocaust a bit of legitimacy, Sergio Leone wrote to Deodato after seeing this, and I've written it out here. He said, "Dear Ruggero, what a movie! The second part is a masterpiece of cinematographic realism, but everything seems so real. I think you will get in trouble with all the world." And he was right.
I remember reading that as well. I love that. I think you will get in trouble with all the world. That's like my favorite.
I mean, this is one of the most fucking banned movies anywhere. Like, this wasn't because the way videos worked here is if you went to cinema, this is early videos, if you went to cinema, you had to go through the censors, but video was unregulated until the Video Recordings Act, which is where all the video nasties came in. So when this, was doing the rounds in cinemas, they didn't even bother trying to get it released here. They knew it was an instant ban, basically.
Yeah, I mean that's coming off video nasties and everything, isn't it? So
no, I mean this is
pre
video nasties we're talking. This
is free. I know.
Before
I mean, it's we just love to ban things anyway, though. Like we were like the country that banned all of the horrors. Like we loved to do it, and then the video nasties happened, and that was like the worst. I think I looked it up, didn't I? Where the country with the most banned and everything, isn't it?
Yes, we did, which is actually ridiculously shocking. I mean, we have to remember as well that for some countries they just don't even bother trying to release films in them. Like very religious countries, they might whereas here everything tries to get released, so it is a numbers game. But yeah, we're pretty shit.
That's very true. Like, obviously, you're not going to get any of these passed in like the video nasties Dubai or like any of
like Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia got an emoji movie a few years ago, so like look how behind the times they are.
Amount of banned movies.
I want to talk briefly about the main characters, and we talked a bit about its sort of political meanings. But and part of the film jumping back on itself, one of the things I think is really clever about the film is in the opening scene, you see them, leaving for the Green Inferno, and they're sort of all jovial and laughing. And then when you get to the footage, you see how fucking staged it is. And then you just see them uncut in their personality, and you can see just how artificial their film is, and this supposedly uncut footage is the non-artificial thing. I think it's such a clever thing to like go back on itself. And if all these things weren't in Cannibal Holocaust, if it was in a more acceptable film, it would have been studied like by everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It's like it is genius, and these are quite possibly, I think I could probably say this, the worst people of all time on any film ever. The characters, like,
I mean, it is fucking up there, and it's so real. Like them, like we're gonna stage this massacre, and we're in the middle of nowhere. There's no laws, or they think there's no laws because they're fucking colonialist people who think they're better than these people. So we're literally gonna rape the local women. That shit happens. That's why it's so disturbing. That happens. People have this attitude. There was a scandal recently where one charity, it's not quite the same thing, but one charity, British charity, were going off to Haiti post earthquake, and a bunch of them paid local women who were starving there because they had just had everything they loved destroyed for sex and stuff. And this shit happens. That is actually the attitude people have. And this film is so terrifying, or it's its most terrifying, not when it's just killing animals for no reason, but when it's showing that attitude completely unfiltered.
Yeah, definitely. I agree because it's terrifying to think that because you're watching the movie and you're like, oh, this would never be a thing. And then you remember that actually this was done for a reason in this movie to show that this actually is a thing. That like we talked about before, like that is why it's shown for the ethics of it. And like as you said, like it is so much more striking when they're showing that rather than just randomly killing animals. Like
I love when sort of the most intense bit when once you see their murder happens and the head of the studio is just like, or the network is just like quietly gets up and it's like, yeah, burn this all. Like that's kind of they recognize that it's morally corrupt, but they don't want to do anything about it. They're like, it never happened. Good day. We're going to get on with our lives. Because again, these are people halfway across the world who live in remote civilizations. There's no accountability, so they can just be like, yeah, we've got footage of rape and murder and everything. Instead of any kind of introspection on our part for funding these people, just burn it. We'll move on with our lives.
yeah, exactly. Well, in the film, the people who did it are dead, aren't they? So I guess they see that as some sort of retribution, and then they're like, just burn it and forget this ever happened. But like, I love that. I love that whole scene with obviously where he's showing the footage to them, and like I forgot every so often it cuts back to them just in silence watching it, and I love that. Like I love that little juxtaposition of the horrible shit going on and then watching.
I love as well how raw the footage looks. Like there's one bit where they're like, this shot is dark because the aperture is too narrow. Look, they fixed it now. I love that. I think that's so cool. It's sort of there's a kind of bit of a kind of film nerdy aspect to it when they're in the edit suite and they're watching through the old machines and stuff. It's a real good narrative device. Like this film is actually pretty damn good at points. Like it's really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Because she said that beginning half's weaker, which I do agree with. But now we're talking about it, I do see that it adds quite a bit, especially with you saying, like, I don't think that bit should be as long as it is. But with you saying, like, him finding the film and then going back and, like, recovering the film, I think that is very nice to see as somebody who loves film, just kind of like the uncovering of film and then showing it.
It's very true, but I think my concern with it's not even the length of the first half, or I talked about sort of depictions of the natives, but the directing isn't quite as good. Like it really, when it's the found footage bits and it feels like people messing about with a camera in the Amazon, it's people messing about with a camera for the Amazon. But in the first half, it still feels like someone messing about with a camera. Like the wildlife shots in this, it's pretty cool because that's real wildlife in the wild, like parrots and marsupials, and there's a type that's real footage and snakes. But it's really not well shot or edited together, and it's quite a shame because it could have had a nice kind of travelogue element to it, which would have added to the kind of adventure movie feel.
That's very true. Yeah, I do agree with the like they should have been directed differently each part because yeah, the first part does just still feel like the second part, and they should have felt like different parts.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go quite that far, but I agree with like the general sentiment of that. And I don't know if they're worse actors than the people on it, or it's just the change to documentary style. But the explorers, I was almost going to call him Alan Grant for a second. It's obviously not Alan Grant. Is his name Alan in this? Why did I say that?
I haven't got a clue.
And I watched the film yesterday. Like they're really believable in their roles, and so's in the first half the kind of mercenary and their guide who's going in, but the kind of anthropologist, he's not that great. He's good walking about New York in the corncob pipe.
I guess it's the trend to. I guess it's the trying to like the first half, the people are quite not great, but they're a bit more normal than the ones in the second half. So the actors in the second half have a lot more to show off, I guess, their acting talent as well, because they get to do horrible shit. So they get to
Yeah,
show that side off,
yeah.
maybe.
Speaking of horrible shit, there's I think what might be the central sequence in this um, is the last road to hell bit. I mean that there's a lot to say, and I don't quite know how to put it in because that is a horrific sequence, but it's got that actually has a lot of reason to be there, and I love how you see all this horrible war footage. And I think they struck the balance between making their point and actually showing real atrocities, but not being too leery. I read that there's like initially the initial edit was 10 seconds longer and they cut the most graphic bits of that out, which I think is correct. But I think seeing that and then you've had obviously a strong emotional reaction to it, and then they go, it's fake, even though some of that wasn't actually fake. It's
Yeah,
quite
true.
interesting. Again, putting you in mind of what's real and what's not in this film.
Yeah, yeah, I do. Yeah, I like that a lot actually as well. Where it's like, this is. I love how they're like it's fake, and then some of that isn't fake, which is like so much of this movie. It's like what is fake and what isn't. Like this movie is like F for fake, you know? Like
It's so true. It's so true. And I guess as well, we can't really talk about Cannibal Holocaust without talking about the soundtrack because it's Riz Ortolani or Riz Ortolani, dyslexia, fucking amazing, actually amazing music in this.
yeah, definitely incredible. It definitely adds to literally all of the scenes. Like it feels weird sometimes being over the footage, but you get used to it and like it's perfect. I think like just incredible.
It's incredible, and I love how you've got bits of the soundtrack which are obviously like directly opposed to what's happening. You've got the really calm, serene, easy theme tune to a movie called Cannibal Holocaust, but then you also have the like synthy heavy bits, and they're also really well composed. They also hit very hard.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it like I said, it adds to each and every scene that it's in quite well, which is obviously what you want music to do. So that's good. And I think it is maybe the best part of the film. Like, not even to say
Yeah,
that's a stretch.
I
Like,
I know I wholeheartedly agree. I think it's sort of if you looked at this film and you tried to look at it as like sort of objective quality as possible, which is a very flawed way of looking at films, and it's not very helpful. I think you'd probably come out saying that the score is the best part of it. It's a really good soundtrack. I was listening to it sort of while making my notes and doing some research and shit, and I was like, it's real nice melodies to it. It's real well composed and well used.
yeah, definitely. Did you know that this film has a sequel as well? Because I did not.
What? Welcome to the Jungle, or whatever the fuck it's called, or is that the remake? That's not really a remake of it.
No, there's like a 1988 sequel that I'll tell you how I found this. It was while I was, it's literally just called Cannibal Holocaust as well. While I was looking to find this film on YouTube, this film is literally on YouTube, uncut on YouTube.
Uncut. You can't buy it uncut in this country, but you can watch it on YouTube.
There was a 1988 version, and I was like, "What on earth is this?" And it's like a like the same style of film, but it's like a romance almost. It sounds amazing, and we should watch it one day.
That, yeah, I've just seen the poster. That looks so low rent. We have to see this. I love it starring Mario Mello as Fred.
Good old Fred.
When you call your main character Fred.
Yeah, do you
So,
have anything else?
um, shall we talk about found footage before we go for final thoughts? Because I mean, we mentioned Blair Witch, but then when Paranormal Activity came out, that shit became totally mainstream. But this has had such an effect on horror, and it's not just the fact that this was the very first stages of found footage, but also you've got kind of Eli Roth was clearly very inspired by it. I believe Deodato has a cameo in Hostel Part 2, and then he made The Green Inferno, which I never saw. I'm sure it's absolutely fucking rubbish.
Not great.
And but the influence of this film is still there. And like at the time, before it was put on the DPP's list of actually prosecutable films, like no one really saw this because no one could tell the difference between this and any other cannibal film. Like, what's the difference between this and Jungle Holocaust or Cannibal Ferox? Who cares? But now it's such a cult staple.
Yeah, exactly. Like, the influence it had is insane, especially found footage style. And the fact that this was 1980 and then found footage didn't get big until
mid 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah, that's such a huge jump in like what this did for that to then get big is insane.
And the way the found footage, it both makes the film more realistic, more hard to watch. It's both great directing and also it really says something when, again, it's turning the film back on itself. So, yeah, final thoughts, I guess, Dom.
I mean, final thoughts are it's a great film and you should probably watch it, but it's so ethically fucked in such a weird way that you should always go into this with like a grain of salt. Like, definitely think about what you're watching more than a lot of extreme cinema because some of this is real.
I agree. I would start exactly how you started. We say it's actually an amazing film and you should watch it. And then I'll say, but I wouldn't blame anyone who didn't, because like it is sort of problematic with a capital P, this. And I really don't hope we're being too controversial by saying that once you get into the stage of actually doing shit, it isn't anything goes no more. And the film could have been so much better if it was a little more moral.
Yes, exactly. I don't think that's a controversial take by any means.
People on the internet are weird, even though they are not the majority of people. So
yeah, exactly.
So we've talked about one horrible, disturbing, awful, vomit-inducing film. Dom, what are we watching next week?
Well, next week, seeing as we've talked about two films that we actually quite like, it's time to talk about something that we hate, Sterner.
Or I've not seen this yet. I've not seen this.
This is very true, yeah. Episode 3 will be the amazing Megan is Missing.
Speaking of films that are real.
Oh, so real, Sterner. It's so real.
I'm so looking forward to seeing how real this movie is.
I cannot wait for you to watch it and hear your thoughts firsthand on this.
Next week's going to be a fun episode. Well, yeah.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening. Goodbye. You've been listening to the Extreme Cinema Podcast with Alexander Sternberg and Dom Loach. If you enjoyed this podcast, please consider subscribing as it really helps us out. The original artwork for the podcast was done by George Arnold. The Extreme Cinema Podcast, available where all good podcasts are available.